Sure. Okay. I don't know if that's actually better, but in my brain it is. Well, it will be better when I'm writing with a nicer. Yes. Okay. When I'm writing with a nicer marker. So I'm gonna try to get a little bit closer. Okie dokie, everyone. Sorry. There we go. Sorry again for the glare of the lights, but such is life. Okay, there we go, everyone. So the warm-up says we have an x-intercept of a line as 6. Remind yourself, anytime you see an intercept, write it as a point. That's the point 6, 0. Because if it's an x-intercept, that means we know the x and the y would be 0. It has a slope of 1/2. That means my m is 1/2. Okay, so point slope is going to be pretty easy. Point slope, I have a coefficient of slope. Y minus 0 equals 1/2 x minus 6. That was pretty easy, or not too bad. And then you can decide how you want to do slope-intercept form. Remember, the intercept, I need the y-intercept, not the x-intercept. So you can plug in if you're really pleased. I'm just going to kind of rearrange this, because if I look at this, I don't really need the 0. I just distribute into there, and that would be y equals 1/2 x minus 3. If you got it in using a different process, that's perfectly fine. But just check those two equations right now and see if you have any questions. Yes, ma'am.
May I use the bathroom?
Yeah, go ahead. Just trying to keep track of people here. So we've been dealing a lot with point slope. We've been dealing a lot with slope intercepts. Today we're going to do our third form. I'm so excited. It's called standard form. Get pumped. Any questions on the warm up? Anyone at home? I'll take that as a no. Always throw it in the chat or just turn your mic on if you have a question. But we'll go to the next. So our third form is called standard form. I'm going to be honest, it's my least favorite. But what can you do? Still got to use it. It does kind of randomly pop up, so it is something that we do want to be familiar with. So the first thing is what's the form? So we know slope-intercept, we know point slope. Standard form is ax plus by equals c. Woo. Now that looks a little different. That looks a little different from our other forms because there's no slope, which we kind of like. There's no points, there's no intercept, it's just like a bunch of letters. And right now that A, B, and C don't really represent anything, so that's actually why it's not as fun. There are a few rules about standard form. The first rule is A always has to be positive. Okay, so if you're rearranging or moving stuff around, the A has to be positive. We'll talk about how to change it if it's not. And then just as a second thing, we never have fractions or decimals when you're writing something in standard form. So if you saw a fraction or decimal, we have ways that we can kind of take care of those, but just as a heads up. So when you're sitting here like, okay, well, just don't write it with fractions or decimals and don't write it or make A positive. But sometimes that doesn't happen. So let's say I had this equation. I'm going to say rearrange to standard form. That's my directions. To standard form. Let's see. 5y minus 2x equals 8. Oh. So you're probably thinking, well, that looks okay. But the issue is you always need the x term first, then the y term, and then it equals c, which just means a constant. In this case, I would have to flip these. So I'm going to put the 2x first. When you're flipping something or if you're moving it around, the sign does stay with it. So we would rearrange that to negative 2x The 5y is positive, so plus 5y equals 8. So we're saying to ourselves, okay, we just want to make sure they are in that order. So sometimes you might have to move stuff around. In this case, we're saying, all right, well, it looks like it's in this form, but it's going against this rule that a has to be positive. A is whatever's in front of x. So to take care of that, to change our sign, and we're actually going to change every sign, we're going to multiply everything by -1. So if you ever have to change the signs in your equation, just because it's going against a rule, you can multiply everything by -1, not just the first term. So that would give me 2x minus 5y equals -8. And just as a heads up, I know this is a plus here. You can have a minus there as well. So that's not necessarily a rule that it has to be positive. You can subtract terms. So just as a heads up on that. So let's look at one with a fraction. Let's look at one with a decimal, just so we can see if those things do pop up, what the heck we do. And then we'll just rearrange one or two more. Just making sure I can see myself. Okay. So let's say I had this nice little fraction one. So it goes against that rule. It says there's no fractions or decimals allowed in standard form. But sometimes when you're rearranging, maybe something happens and you're left with some fractions. We've done this before. And the thing that we've done is say we don't really want fractions. To kind of deal with them, we're going to multiply everything by the common denominator. In this case, my common denominator is 8. So I would distribute in 8 times 1/2 is 4. 8 times 3/4 would be 6. And then 8 times 7/8 would be 7. And I just check everything's in the correct order. You have x, y equals your number. The first term's positive, which we need. No fractions or decimals, so we're good. So now we're following all the rules of standard form. So just as a heads up. All right, now I just want to show you a decimal one. Let's do 0.26x plus 0.13y equals 0.7. So in this case, we're saying, oh, that goes against the no decimal rule. I think we've seen ones like this before too. I can't even remember the beginning of the year at this point, but if you ever want to get rid of decimals, you are going to multiply by the longest decimal place. So if you think about it, this is to the hundredths, this is to the hundredths, this is to the tenths. So we're going to multiply by 100. So if 2 is my largest decimal, 2 decimal places, then there's 2 zeros. Basically what it does is it just moves the decimal 2 places to the right. Just be careful with this one. It would be 26x plus 13y. Make sure, a lot of people just write 7, but you need to move it 2 places. That would equal 70. So just as a heads up there. But that's how you kind of deal with those rules. So if you see them and you rearrange something and maybe a isn't positive, you can multiply everything by -1. If you see something with fractions, you can multiply by the common denominator. And if you see something with decimals, you just find your longest decimal and multiply by that decimal place. So I'll leave that up for a second. So obviously before we talk about putting stuff in standard form, we just need to make sure we're putting it in the correct way and using all those rules. Any problems with that? Okay. So now when we think about standard form, let's think about our other forms as well. So I'm going to say rearrange to standard, so same directions. This is actually what you're going to do a lot with standard form. You're going to start with another form. So here we're starting with slope-intercept. And then we're going to rearrange it to standard. The reason we're going to start with other forms a lot is because we can plug into those other forms. We can plug in things like slopes and points. But then if we need it in standard form, we would just kind of move things around. So if I say rearrange this to standard form, I just think in my head, okay, ax plus by equals c. I need I need x and y together on one side and just the constant or number on the other. So in this case, I want to move this x. Since it's positive 2x, I'm going to subtract it to move it from the left to the right, or from the right to the left. I'm all backwards. I'm going to put things in the correct order. Negative 2x plus y equals 6. And then I just think about my rules. Unfortunately, I have to kind of take care of this because I can't have that negative there. So I'm going to multiply everything by negative 1 to get 2x minus y equals negative 6. So we're going to be doing this a lot once again, going from one form to the other. And we do that with standard form quite a bit. So let's look at one in point slope. 4x plus 3. So we're given something in point slope, and we're asked to rearrange it to standard. Okay, we can do that. We can distribute in on the right side. I always kind of focus on getting my x and y to the same side. So I'm going to move the x from the right to the left. Since it's positive, I'm going to subtract it. So I end up with negative 4x plus y, but I don't want that minus 4 there, right? I want the numbers on the other side. So it's kind of the same step. I'll add 4 to move it from the left to the right. So it's really just about kind of moving things around to where you need them. And then once you've done that, once again, it happens a lot when you kind of rearrange, you get that negative in front. So we'll take care of that. And in standard form, it would be 2x minus y equals negative 16. Woo! So at the current moment, does anyone have a question with those steps? Just moving things around, basically. Over here, no. Okay, isn't that great? So let's just bump it up a notch. I don't want to bore you guys. I want to do some fun stuff here. Oh, sorry. Trying to stay like this one section so the camera can actually see it. Okay, so my directions are going to say write an equation in standard form. And I'm going to give you 2 pieces of information. Let's say I know the slope of the line is 6, and I know it goes through the point 2, negative 1. So I'm saying to myself, what the heck do I do? Because when I think about ax plus by equals c, there's literally no place to even put m. I guess I could put x and y in, but that's not really going to do much because my main goal is to figure out what numbers or what coefficients a, b, and c are. So the main thing with standard form, I'm going to make a little note to myself, put in another form and rearrange. Okay, so you're never really just going to be plugging into standard, unfortunately. It's one of those ones you have to kind of do some other work to get there. You can decide which one you'd like to do. I'm going to start with point slope because I have a point and a slope. So I'm going to throw in point slope. Y plus 1 equals 6x minus 2. So without too much effort, I could put it in a different form. Now let's start to kind of move stuff around. Let's distribute. So y plus 1 equals 6x minus 12. Okay. Now we just need to kind of move things. So x and y are together, and then it equals the constant. So I'm going to move my x over here. If you do it the other way, that's fine. I always just tend to move the variables to the left. I'm also going to just, in this first step, just move that 1 over there so I don't have to do 2 things. And I end up with negative 6x plus y equals negative 13. One last step, get rid of that negative out in front. And my final answer would be 6x minus y equals 13. What a beauty. So the main goal is, I have this information. It doesn't really help me to put it into standard form. So you're always going to put it into another form and then rearrange it. I'm going to give you one very similar. Can you guys try this one? This time I'm going to give you 2 points. I'm going to say the points 3, 7, and 5, 11. Now, if I said standard form, I don't know what goes where. So I highly suggest one, you would find the slope. So find the slope first. Then you can decide, do I want to use point slope or slope intercept? Put it in that form, and then can you rearrange it to standard? So just see how far you can get. I'm just going to do some attendance while you guys try that. Let's see how you're feeling. All right, block 4. Here we go. Oops, let me just check. Oh, thank you, Molly. You don't need it right here. I'm just going to go through the names, but thank you. I'm just going through them as you guys are trying them.
So modes in histogram are the humps. Okay? So, what do they show you? They show you where most of the data is.
What a beauty.
Look at histogram. One thing to stand out. So this tells you most of the kids got it down here, 53, and also up here, 769. So I don't know, the histogram kind of looks like there's two groups of kids going on. Down there and up here. Okay?
I'm going to give you about 30 more seconds.
There's a couple of distinct forms of our book. We can have one hump, one hump. One hump, one hump.
All right, let's see how we did. Does anyone have any questions before we start to go over it? Okay. So first thing you need to do, no matter what, you're going to have to find the slope. So find your slope first. Slope formula, 11 minus 7 over 5 minus 3. That gives me 4 over 2 for a slope of 2. Okay, delightful. I'm partial to point slope because I have it. So if you like slope intercept, go for it, and you're going to kind of do it that way. But I might as well just use what I got. So I'm going to use the first point. Y minus 7 equals 2 parentheses x minus 3. If you use the second point, we'll get the same thing. If you use another process, we'll get the same thing. So if you're not getting the same thing, let me know. I'm going to distribute in. And I just remind myself, I need x and y together. So I'm going to move the x over here. You're seeing these steps are looking very similar. We're just kind of changing the numbers from over here. I'm going to move the constant over here. I end up with negative 2x plus y equals 1. And then I'm just going to take care of that negative. And that won't always happen, that negative's there. It's just happened in the last few. But you should get 2x minus y equals negative 1. So once again, if any of the other numbers are negative, that's fine. It's only that first number that has to be positive. So can you take a second now and please check that? Does anyone have a question with number 2? Remember at home, feel free to throw in the chat or always just yell out. Okay, isn't that just great? So our main goal is if we're given information, we should be able to write a line in any form. But like I'm still saying to myself, like, who cares about standard form, really? Like, why would we need it? What is it useful for? It's basically useful for one thing. So let me show you that one thing, and then I'm just gonna give you a few review problems after. So standard form is useful for one thing, and that is for finding x and y intercepts. So in a very quick manner, you can find them. So I'm going to do an example with you just to show you. So let's say I had the equation 2x plus 4y equals 12. So we have a nice little equations in standard form, feeling pretty good, except I don't really know anything. I'm just like looking at an equation in standard form. So what I can do, like if it said something like graph it or do something else, technically you could rearrange it if you really wanted to, till maybe slope intercept. But I can find the x-intercept and the y-intercept pretty easily. And I can find the x-intercept by plugging in a 0 for y. And solving for x. Now when I say plug in a 0, I'm literally going to do it in the easiest possible way. So here's how I find an x-intercept. I plug in a 0 for y. If I put a 0 here, that's just going to make that whole term 0. So here's what I do. Plug in a 0 for y. There you go. Good. So I actually just end up with the equation 2x equals 12. So if I do a quick solve of that, x is going to be 6. Now I'm going to write my intercepts as points. So that would be the point 6, 0, right? Because the y was 0. And anytime you're on an x-axis, your y is always 0 because you're not going up or down. So once again, here's what I do. If I need an x-intercept, I basically just cover the y, or you can plug in a 0 for y. I'm left with 2x equals 12. You divide both sides by 2, your x is 6. Donezo. So without having too much work, we could find that. The y-intercept, same thing. Plugging in 0 for x. So you just switch your variables. Solve for y. So if I plug in a 0 for x, here's what I do. I just cover it, because if you plug in a 0, it's just going to cancel. I end up with 4y equals 12. I can solve that quickly. In my head, it's 3. So I would write my y-intercept as a point, and that would be the point 0, 3. Later in the week, I know you guys are going to be pumped about this, we're going to do some graphing. So we'll talk about actually graphing those intercepts and what it will look like. Now, if you do have 2 points, you could find things like what's the slope. You could put it in a different form if you needed to. But those are going to be the useful information that you can get from standard form, the intercepts. So we'll use those quite a bit when we're graphing at the end of the week. So I'm going to have you guys try one. Because once again, the work isn't really hard. If I gave you this equation. If I gave you that equation, what's the x-intercept as a point, and what's the y-intercept as a point? Okay, take a second right now. 3x minus 9y equals 18.
Right. To the right.
Oh my goodness. So once again, that should have maybe taken you 10 seconds, but I'm just giving you a few extra for good faith here. Across the wall. So once again, you should be doing a lot of work. The x-intercept, you cover the y, you're plugging a 0 for y. I'm left with 3x equals 18, so that ends up being 6, 0. What did I? Oh no. It's not always 6, it just was magical, at least 2. To find the y-intercept, I end up plugging in a 0 for x. You can kind of just cover it because it would cancel. Just pay attention to signs as well. If I divide it to get y by itself, my y-intercept should be 0, -2. And then you'd be done. So at the current moment, does anyone have a question? What's that? All right, one more thing, and then that's kind of the new stuff for today, and then we'll just try a few at the end. All right, last problem, or last new problem. Once again, we've kind of been talking like standard form. Yeah, it is what it is, but. What we do want to be able to do is kind of rearrange it to other forms if we need. Sometimes you might have an intercept and they're just like, it's not helpful, or you might have to do, I don't know, some other stuff. So one thing we will do quite a bit is we want to be able to rearrange this to slope intercept.
If it's the same on both sides, remember what you call that?
So that is something I feel like in all my other math classes, it's like one of those things, this step always pops up. So if I say rearrange to slope intercept form, just because depending on what we need, maybe that information will be more helpful. Our main goal is really to just isolate this y, because slope intercept form is y equals mx plus b. So in order to do that, we just need to move some stuff around. The first thing I'm going to move is this 2x, because it's kind of there by itself, and then I'll move that 6 after. So if I start with that, I'm sorry, I didn't give myself a lot of room there. I'm going to start to isolate the y. I'm going to move the 2x. Since it's positive, I am going to subtract it because I'm moving the entire thing. I do highly suggest as you're rearranging, slope intercept form is mx plus b. So I'm going to put that negative 2x first and then the 12. And so we do want things in a certain order when we're talking about different forms. So slope intercept, you want mx plus b. But I still want this y by itself. And in order to do that, since that's connected with multiplication, I'm going to divide by 6. So once I get to here, I just want to make sure everything's simplified, reduced, all that fun stuff. So both of these can get divided by 6. So that would give me, if I reduce that, negative 1/3 x. And then if I reduce this, it would be plus 2. So if I said something like, hey, here's this equation, what's the slope? And you would say, I don't know what the heck the slope is. You can just rearrange it. If I gave you this equation and said, hey, what's the y-intercept? You wouldn't necessarily have to rearrange it. You could just kind of go like that, right? But depending on what information we need, different forms might be more helpful. So we do want to make sure we're getting used to going in between different forms. Okay, so I'm going to give you a second. I'm going to put up 3 problems I'm going to have you try. It's basically just going to be going between different forms just to make sure we're getting used to everything. And then we'll try to wrap it up after that. So hopefully that wasn't too terrible. Tomorrow, we're doing something. I don't know what yet. I have to figure that out. So I'll figure that out today. It is a full remote day, so I will see you guys at 8:32. And I have a little assignment in the afternoon. And then at the end of the week, cohort B'ers, you'll be here, which will be super exciting. And then the cohort A, people will be at home, but we're going to kind of just keep continuing with what we're doing. We are going to be doing some graphing, so people got the worksheet today, and then we'll kind of do it at the end. Then after that, we'll probably kind of stop and take an assessment, maybe like the beginning of next week. So if you're not getting something, please do ask. All right, so here's kind of our, do we know what's going on? We've had all these forms. Can we kind of bring everything together with all the information that we need? So number 1, so I'm trying to see how far over I can go, okay. So I'm going to give you some information. I'm going to say we have a line that goes through the points -1, 5, and 2, 8. Can you write an equation in standard form? Remember standard form? That information means a whole bunch of nothing, so you use another form and then rearrange it. So that's where the rearranging comes in. Second one, I'm gonna give you an equation in standard form. We'll say. Right today, intercept. Sorry if I'm in the way. I'm gonna move in a second. What is the y-intercept? I'm not gonna get crazy here. What is the slope? See if you can kind of figure that out, or you can rearrange it to another form. And then one last one that's kind of a wrap up. I just had something in my brain. What was I gonna do? Oh.
This is.
Okay. So none of that I've ever seen written. Sorry, I had those in my brain. I just had to get them out. So number one, you have 2 points. You're trying to write it in standard form. Once again, using another form first might be a little bit more helpful. 2, I gave you an equation in standard form, 4x minus y equals 12. I'm asking you what's the x-intercept, what's the y-intercept, and then I threw in what's the slope. So can you figure out the slope from there? And then 3, I gave you 2 intercepts. Remember, they're just 2 points. And I'm asking you to write it in standard form. So everything kind of relates back to standard form, but you might need to use those other forms in there. So I'm going to give you a few minutes to work. If you're at home, feel free to comment or just come on and say like, hey, I need help, or I just want to check something. But that's always our main goal, for you to be following along. So you let me know. And if you're here, obviously you send me well.
So one label modality.
Here we go.
Approximately 2 seconds.
2 seconds.
So the first one. It's funny because in the past sometimes you're like, no guys, like you need to focus, you need to like, so at least people will.
Someday, Jordan, someday.
Maybe remember that in biology, freshman year.
Anyone you know?
Well, they say they don't. For the COVID vaccine. Flu vaccine. Yeah, so a lot of the flu vaccines are like, this is why this is not.
God bless it.
But if you're not safe.
But I love Boston.
So are we feeling comfortable with standard form? That's the question of the day. No, we just introduced it today. Did you guys see this last year? Standard.
They brought it up, but they didn't do much of it.
Okay, just like. I always ask questions because sometimes I'm used to you guys doing more stuff last year, but obviously we were short about 3.5 months, so if you ever need more help or need more time, just let me know. I'm getting my own little groove here. Say like 2 more, a minute or 2, and then I'm gonna start to go over them just so I have time and I'm not rushing myself.
Oh, yeah, I feel like you did.
Few more seconds.
All right, folks, want to talk about these? Yes? All right, number 1, describing that, talking about weight, but a couple of things. First thing, how many humps? How many humps does it have?
All right, I'm gonna start to go over them, just so I have time and we're not all rushing again. So main goal, standard form, use other forms because that's not really gonna help me right now. So first I'm gonna do is find the slope. So 8 minus 5 over 2 minus -1. That will give me 3 over 3 for a slope of 1. You can decide what form. I'm just gonna use point slope because why not? It's right there. I'm gonna use the first point. Y minus 5 equals 1 parentheses x plus 1. So just be careful with signs. And then I'm just gonna start to kind of distribute and move some stuff around. My x's I want to put with my y, my constants I want to put together. I end up with negative x plus y equals 6. I need to take care of that coefficient, and my final equation should be x minus y equals -6. Beauty.
Oh, yeah.
We're having weird noises here at the school. I'm not sure what's happening. Does anyone have a question on number 1?
To the right, to the right, to the right.
I'll take that as a no. Okay, number 2, we have an equation. What's the x-intercept? I can find that pretty quickly just by covering my y or plugging in a 0. The x-intercept would be 3. Remember, we rate it as a 0.30. What's the y-intercept? Cover the x or plug in a 0. Just be careful, it's negative y. So the y-intercept would be -12. When it says what's the slope, you can do a few things. You can rearrange that to slope-intercept form. I have 2 points now. I'm just going to find the slope of those 2 points. -12 minus 0 over 0 minus 3. That gives me -12 over -3. The slope would be 4. So I feel like sometimes you just don't think and then you do way more work than you have to. Once you have 2 points, you can always find a slope. So just as a heads up, if it ever asks you for a slope of a standard form, you can just find the intercept quick and then just do it from there. And then last but not least, don't try. Some people try to do weird things with the 2 and the 7 and you put them in weird spots. No, it's just same as number 1. Find your slope. So -7 over -0, over 0 minus 2. That gives me -7 over -2, so that would turn positive. Okay. I'm going to plug it into a different form. I'm going to use point slope. Y minus 0 equals 7 over 2 parentheses x minus 2. I'm going to kind of move I don't even need the 0, right? I'm going to distribute it. Okay, that wasn't that bad to multiply that in. And what else do I gotta do? Oh, I have to put the x with the y. So it's really just about, the actual math behind it is just moving stuff around. Can you still see me over here? Yeah, you can. So I end up with -7/2x plus y equals -7, and then I take care of that first. Oh my God, Mrs. Sherman, you nutbag. I take care of the sign, but I also need to take care of the fraction. So I'm gonna multiply by a negative, but I'm gonna make it a 2. So since the common denominator of those are just over 1 is 2, oh, golly. That would give me 7x minus 2y equals 14. What a beauty. Let me show you this over here. Okay, so once again, I like kind of get in my groove and then I forget what I'm doing because whatever. So make sure not only do you take care of the sign in front, but I also have to take care, because we cannot have fractions. So that's why I multiplied everything by -2, because that was the denominator. Okay, that was a nice little marathon of standard form, guys. Thank you for bearing with me. I will see you tomorrow. Excuse me. We'll do some other stuff.